If you've been browsing Rolex vintage watches and have came across the term Rolex Zephyr and you aren't sure what it is, this video will definitely help you out. I'm Felix from Gold Vintage Watches, and in today's video we will tell you everything you have to know about this vintage Oyster Perpetual. So let's roll the intro and get into today's video. The Rolex Zephyr is a particular style of the vintage Oyster Perpetual that features a special dial and a special bezel design. Since the Oyster Perpetual is a time-only Rolex model, void of any date windows, the dial is beautifully symmetrical and appealing simple. With a small but continuous production run from the mid-1950s to the 1970s, Rolex introduced only 6 different references over the decades. Its design, characterized by a crosshair dial and a faceted bezel, is distinct, and given it was only produced in extremely small quantities, a rarity to come across. And the origins of the first Rolex Zephyr date back to 1955, when the reference 6582 was marketed, the model we do have here today. But before we jump into this model in depth, let's take a brief look on the Rolex lettering on the dial and what they're meaning. We can imagine that the most of you already know everything about it, but a quick refresher can't hurt. Underneath the famous gold-raised Rolex logo, the dial features the terms Oyster Perpetual and above the 6-hour marker, officially certified chronometer. Oyster means that the case is a waterproof oyster case. Introduced in 1926, the case back and the bezel were screwed together, and the newly patented screw-down winding crown could be screwed in all the way to hermetically seal the case. Perpetual is the name of the self-winding movement. In 1931, Rolex developed and patented the world's first self-winding mechanism with a perpetual rotor. So if you can read perpetual on a Rolex dial, it is self-winding. And officially certified chronometer means that it has been certified as chronometer by the Swiss Official Chronometer Testing Institute, in short COSC or COSC. The Rolex Precision models, for example, did not feature this certificate. As a result, the production costs were significantly lower and Rolex was able to offer the watch at a lower price. Also interesting is that the Zephyr doesn't actually say Zephyr on the dial, but almost every other Rolex model from the era does feature its name, like the Air King, the Precision, Datejust, Day-Date, Submariner, etc. It seems strange that the Zephyr name has no known meaning. It's not like the Zephyr is just a nickname, because you can find Rolex print ads that feature the Zephyr and call it by name, but they never discuss the meaning behind it. So enough school for today, let's talk about why the Zephyr has a unique and unusual design for Rolex watches back in the days. This model introduced for the first time the 2 typical elements that will become the distinctive features of the Zephyr range over the years to come. The sector dial and the particular graduated bezel. And the first thing you will spot if you look at the decoration of the dial are the 2 perpendicular lines that divide it into 4 areas. The lines are called crosshair. In these watches, a crosshair marking centered on the dial extends from 12 to 6 and 9 to 3. You can also find this type of dial decoration on watch brands like Jaeger-LeCoultre and Omega. Sometimes this crosshair extends all the way to the edge of the dial, but often it ends inside the hour markers. But what was the reason for using this type of dial decoration? Unfortunately, we can't find a real foundation for this. But fact is that it is used generally on displays during the 1950s-60s, as you can see it here on a picture from a vintage BMW. In our opinion, the use of a cross on a dial is not only a nice touch to an otherwise plain simple watch face, but it has secondary effect of a practical way of dividing the dial into 4 different sections. And so it helps for a faster orientation. Our model comes in a 35mm 3-body steel case with a screw-down case back, and the first version with the reference 6582 was only available in steel with yellow or rosé gold and remained in production until the end of the 1950s. Over the 20 years of production, Rolex launched 6 different references, with a lot of variations of materials, dials, hands, and also bracelets. Our Zephyr has a gold colored dial with even patina, but you also can find silver and black dials on the first models. Another characteristic of the Zephyr dial are the small lume plots that act as hour markers. They are very discreet and give the whole dial a classic and simple look with a great stylistic cleanness. Aside from the instantly recognizable dial, another important detail of the Rolex Zephyr is an engine turned fluted bezel accented with facets. Beneath the caseback sits the Rolex caliber 1030, which, as the dial confirms, is a perpetual movement. Rolex isn't known for creating the most beautiful movements, but it is known for creating some of the most reliable and robust movements in the world that keeps ticking year after year with reliable and high precision. It was the first in-house complete caliber designed of Rolex and began its life in 1950. This caliber was also used in several Submariner and Explorer references. The caliber 1030 was the most popular movement at the time. This caliber features an unique rotor which is totally different with today's. Two prongs are hollowed on the semicircle. Around the outer rays engraved with the word of Rolex Perpertual, beneath is the word of patented, and the iconic pattern of the Rolex crown. All through, the Rolex Zephyr was not a massive hit during its era. But there is a plenty of interest in this particular vintage model in watch collecting circles, thanks to its unusual design and relative rarity. So that's all for today. We hope you were able to collect some information you haven't heard before. If you have any further questions, please comment down below. We will answer any question. And yeah, have a great day and hope to see you in our next video.